This is a Glendale Library Arts and Culture program created for and featuring teens, edited and hosted by the Teen Library staff.
This episode is part of Glendale Library Arts and Cultures and the Southern California Library Cooperative's Be the Change series, which focuses on inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism. Be the Change events will build collective understanding of systematic racism, elevate the voices and stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and inspire our community to be the change.
As part of Native American Heritage Month in early November, Glendale Library Arts and Culture will host various programs. The first is Walter Echo Hawk, who will discuss his book, In the Courts of the Conquerors, the 10 Worst Indian Law Cases Ever Decided, on Thursday, November 5th. On November 30th, at 6:30 p.m., author David Heska Wyden will discuss his new novel, Winter Counts. Register for the event at www.glac.info/BeTheChange.
Hi everyone, it's Melissa.
And Desiree.
Welcome to the guest episode of Teen G.E.N Talks.
Today's guest is the founder of Red Planet Books and Comics, the only Native American comic shop in the world, as well as Native Realities Publishing and the Indigenous ComicCon. He is the author of several comic books, including Six Killer and Ghost River. He is also the author of RPG, several expansions, Devil's Run, Down Darker Trails, and Colonies. He is a grade A Indigenerd and lives in Albuquerque with his family.
Grab a snack and drink, and let's welcome Dr. Lee Francis IV to Teen G.E.N Talks.
Yay!
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee Francis IV, for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. We have a lot to discuss.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really wonderful in our new age, our new digital age.
Yeah. So I want to start off the interview by asking, how did you fall in love with comic books in general? And if you remember the first comic book you ever read?
I don't know if I can remember as far back as the first. I have a very distinct memory of being a kid in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and going down to a place called Durand Central Pharmacy, and they had an old spinner rack. And my dad let me pick some stuff off the spinner rack. And I mean, I don't really see them anymore. It's all wall boards now, but you know, that rack was really important. It's been really seminal in my like sort of remembrances of comic books. I remember an early one was a Marvel Almanac. That was an early one that I owned, and that had like all the, you know, like characters, you know, in them and their powers and who they were. And there was like an Almanac of the Dead where there was like, you know, like when they died and, you know, how they died and all the rest of that. So like for me, I was always really fascinated by like the history of the characters. Like I've always been a history fan as well, and sort of the history of the characters and, you know, where they come from and who they are and whatnot. So I remember, you know, potentially one of my earliest ones probably was maybe a Thor, you know, kind of drifting back in there. And then I actually fell in love with Iron Man for a while, for a long time. I still love Iron Man. So that was my earliest collection, was the early Iron Man. I used to have them up. I'd have them in, you know, I'd have them all board bagged and boxed, and then I'd like take the extras that I had and I put them up all on my walls. So yeah, so I mean, I've loved comics for a while. I come from a literary family. I come from a family of readers. My dad was a big science fiction fantasy fan. My mom was a big fantasy fan. So I think it was an easy transition. And my dad in particular never really had any stigmas against reading comics. So it wasn't something that was, you know, put down in our house. He was like, you want to read? Go ahead and read. That sounds great. So that's what I do. I'd read comics. I'd read, you know, whatever I could get my hands on. And you know, as I continued to grow older, I think it, you know, my interest began to develop more. And so it branched not only from the singles and from the stories, but looking for things that were even more narrative and new and fresh and playing with the genre and developing new stories that I was really interested in. So I've had that with me since I was as long back as I can remember.
You are the owner and CEO of Native Realities. Can you explain a bit of what the company is and what has been your goal in creating the company?
Yeah. So Native Realities, I founded Native Realities back in 2014. The idea was to create media, or pop culture media specifically, help dispel or be a counterpoint to the misrepresentations, to the stereotypes of Native and Indigenous people within popular culture. I've been studying popular culture for 20 some years at this point. I began my career actually as an educator at Laguna Acoma High School. That's where my dad's side of the family is from Laguna Pueblo, about 45 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And when I was teaching, it was one of the things that I really began to notice was just the lack, not even just like pop culture material, not even comic books, books, right? So there's like a small bit of kids books. There's at the time, a small bit of kids books, picture books, mostly by non-natives. If you did find picture books by native folks, they were, very few and far between, and they were often very localized. So it was very hard to get them nationally. I also found that it was very difficult to see native folks that weren't sidekicks. So I began researching it. My undergraduate is in theater, and I had started doing research at that point of how natives were portrayed on stage. And there's a direct link to the way that native people were portrayed on stage, working throughout history, and then into literature, and then into film and television, and a lot of it being very stereotypical, being very misrepresentative, being very violent towards native and indigenous peoples here in North America. So noticing that as an educator, as a teacher, I decided that I really needed to do something about that, and felt that it was really important that I started publishing and working with native creatives that I know, some really incredible folks, to develop out this company, to make our first comic books and creations. And I think we published like 2 in the first year, and then 4, and then now we're up to over a half a dozen. Some of them that have been critically acclaimed, including Ghost River, which we just published this last year. And then we have other, various things that I'm still trying to fit out. The rest of it is like, okay, we got the comics book side, we still have to publish some of those. And then a bunch of other stuff, which I'm sure we'll get to, a bunch of other stuff sort of started to develop as well, which pulled me in multiple directions, but has allowed us to get not only Native Realities, but the other entities that I run, more traction, more understanding, and more representation in the media for what we've been trying to accomplish.
And do you think it's gotten better throughout the years of you studying all of this about the representation and all that stuff?
Yes and no. It's changed. I named the company Native Realities because the idea was that we were trying to portray the native realities, the realities of native people, not something that was a mythological representation of native people. Although there can be, in stereotypes, in mythology, there can be, aspects and elements that are true, but they're often inflated and they're often misrepresented. So that's I always say that whenever anybody's just like, well, stereotypes are rooted to in reality. I was like, no, they're actually not. They're rooted in a fantasy, a fantastical reality, and they are very rarely representative of the lived experience of anybody that deals with a stereotype, right? Even though we joke about our own internal stereotypes, right? I'm like, what's, it's the flying chunkless, right? Grandma gonna eat chancla. I'm like, yeah, that's something that we joke about, but it is also something that when it subsumes, the idea with stereotypes is it subsumes all other signifiers of the identity of the individual. And so it becomes boiled down to just a small, usually visual representations of how people exist, right? And media does this over and over and over and over and over again. It's funny because I look on TikTok and I look on Instagram, stuff like that. I'm not trying to be cool. I like it. I'm one of those late Gen Xers that likes to go check out what's going on. I like it because it's quick, it's easy, it's fun to watch. But a lot of the times, the things that gets likes and laughs, they're often portraying some stereotypes, right? So sometimes they're really, really essentializing a particular existence, right? This is how Mexicans are. This is how natives are, as if it's definitive, right? So I don't necessarily know if it has gotten better. Better is, I think, a subjective word. I think it has changed in a way that has created more dynamic representations and allowed more people at the table. However, that being said, popular media, especially tends to still revert to the tropes that have already been established. Right. So I think the last major movies that came out all featured some variation of a dead or dying Indian, right? And I use that very deliberately in terms of that. And it's, and for me, that's where we haven't made the step. So there's more sympathy toward Native people in our current mindset and current era. However, I've already seen this because I've done the history for 400 years. There was sympathy back 400 years ago. It's called The Noble Savage. And there was sympathy when James Fenimore Cooper wrote Last of the Mohicans. That was also a noble savage, but it was a vanishing, it was a dead or dying Indian, right? The Indians are leaving, and we feel so sad as white America, and curse the English, you know. And when the movie comes out, it's the same kind of thing. Dances with Wolves, right? Same mindset of how Native people exist. That there's always this underlying sense of tragedy, not an underlying sense of resilience. And that's what we're trying to get at. So when I'm working on this work, I think it's changing because Native folks are now in the game. I just read in a fantastic article that called out one of my colleagues, Dr. Elizabeth LaPonce at Michigan State University. She's a game designer, an incredible game designer. There's been tons of, you know, wonderful Native-centric, tribalographic games that she's designed. I mean, like, she's the queen of Native game design. And so, you know, or I guess I won't say like Indian princess, because no, I'm just kidding. I don't, what a matriarch. She's the matriarch, right, of Native game design. There it is. She they did some incredible work. One of her, I don't know him personally. Brave, Mr. Brave is the last name. Brave is the last name. They did Age of Empires. So Age of Empires 3 that came out had a lot of issues with it. They got a lot of feedback. They went to a Native community. They went to a Native person. He wrote a narrative. He's in the gaming industry. He was able to get them to change a lot of the things. One of the things that I thought was fantastic was that they addressed this issue of mining, right? So in Age of Empires, you can go through a mine, you mine for gold. Well, rather than saying like mining, he came with this point that it's antithetical to like Native existence. I don't know how that would be, because pretty much our existence stopped 400 years ago. So maybe would have been mining more, maybe we wouldn't. Who knows? But what he changed it to was the tribal marketplace, the community marketplace, and that's where you generate revenue. And I was like, that's so genius, because most of our societies had robust trading networks and robust marketplaces that generated incredible economies and economies of wealth for Indigenous people. So changes like that are the things that are really dynamic for me right now. I'm excited that folks are starting to listen, but I think a lot of it is because people like me, people like Dr. LaPonce, we're, you know, Mr. Brave, we're gaining a skill set and making sure that we're visible and that we're noticed and that we can articulate both the necessities of the industry as well as the necessities of our cultural dynamics.
You are also the founder of Red Planet Books and Comics. Can you talk a little bit more about the store?
Oh, yeah. It's the only Native comic shop in the world. As far as I know, I don't think anybody else is coming along to try and take our crown. So, and even when they do, then we just get to be the first. So that's fine with me. In fact, I would be super happy if we got, like, it was just like, well, you're not the only. And I'd be like, yeah, I'd be super excited. But right now, I think we are a bookstore and comic book shop. So we run a majority of comic books. We run Native comic books. 90% of our work is non-Western in terms of our book selection and our comic selection. And the other, I mean, maybe I'll say 80%, because we've really built out our comic book stock in the pandemic months. So it's shrinking, but even in that comic book stock, although we carry a lot of the standards, we still carry and privilege communities of color, writers of color, and characters of color. So I make no bones about it. I'm just like, look, we're a specialty shop. If you're looking for other things, there are great other shops. I don't have to carry everything for everybody, right? That's not my job. I founded Red Planet on the heels of the Indigenous ComicCon, which I also founded as a way to just kind of keep the party going. We needed office space because I had too many books in my house and I had too many posters and all of the stuff that we had accumulated from the first Comic-Con. And my wife was like, yo, I can't get down the hallway. You need to move some stuff. I'm like, all right. So we were like, well, I need an office. Also, I started to get a staff. And so I was just like, I don't want them in my living room. They can't be meeting here. No. So we found a little storefront with our operating partner, the Southwest Organizing Project here in Albuquerque. And they've been a great partner up to this point. They've been a great partner throughout. And we found this little shop, and this little shotgun shop. Goes all the way back. We got about 800 square feet. We're using about 400 of it right now. And we are pretty much, one of the sole distributors. You can find most of if you're looking for good Native books, good quality stuff, you want to look at us first.
And how has COVID affected Red Planet Books and Comics?
Yeah, I mean, it's been difficult. Everybody's had, everybody's struggling in some ways. I think we've been able to ride the storm, primarily because I never put eggs in one basket, to use the colloquialism, or I don't even remember what it's called, the saying, I guess. So that's why we not only published, but we had a trade show, which was the Comic Con, and we had a storefront. And then last year we started making moves towards really getting into distributing, which we can cultivate, we can, develop your native book lists. We can help you develop out your comic book list that's age appropriate, that you can build out your library with, because it's really hot right now, and not just simply because of superheroes, but because of what comic books have always offered, graphic novels have always offered, which is really interesting reading. It's visual, you got characters. I mean, that's why I've always loved it. So, there's been a lot of pivoting, there's been a lot of work. In the early days, like March, April, we had to cancel the Comic-Con, and then moving into April, it was really for me all around just maintaining visibility, right? Hi, we're still here. We didn't fail. We're not closing down. So and also support. I mean, like, our other mission is not just getting books out there, which is the point of, like, of selling books so that it's in the shops, but also supporting Native creatives, right? So Indigenous creatives. And most of them had and continue to have no gigs. A lot of them, lived on this gig or trade show economy, right? So they'd be slinging their stuff on the side of the road, or they'd be slinging their stuff at my Comic-Con or the other Comic-Con or Indian Market or Santa Fe Market or, Gathering of Nations, right? So a lot of my friends and their, colleagues and friends of mine, they're out of work. So partly, I was scrambling to try and find resources and whatnot to get in, to make sure that Native folks, that Native artists still had some revenue in that time. So a lot of it, we pivoted, just making sure our name was on stuff. In the meantime, we continue to develop various things. One of the projects you can see right here, we actually kickstarted successfully, this little project. So we've got our Indigimatch cards. So we've got our new first game that came out. So it's a matching game. Native heroes. So it's just for kids, little kids. So, we kickstarted that successfully. So we got a little box. There it is right there. Oh, yeah, I guess you got to show it in my face. Otherwise,
yeah.
it's a green box, right? So, so that we're looking for filling that next month for everybody before the holidays during Native American Heritage Month. I got a few things that I got to tweak on some of the quality. So we're doing some quality control stuff right now. But that's essentially what we've been working on, right? So, yeah, that's and now we just continue to do that. We're building out the staff a little bit more. We're trying to get more of the books in and going from there. So
in your bio, you mentioned you're a grade A Indigennerd. Can you explain the term a little bit for, like, people that don't know what it is?
Sure. I define Indigenerd as somebody that wants to, well, somebody that, like, within popular culture and sort of nerd culture, nerdcore, is someone that wants to see dynamic and authentic representations of Native and Indigenous people in pop culture. It's really simple. Anyone can be an Indigenerd, right? So, I mean, you got to be, a little bit delicate about how you're going to take that on. But for me, I take that on full, that's what I do. I love nerd stuff. It's kind of how I live my life. I play games, I read comics, I do all this stuff. I run a business that revolves around that. I get to talk about it all day. It's like my favorite days when we're at the shop or online is like, yeah, what's the new stuff that did you just see what happened? So, I was just really fortunate. They just came through last week to film me for StarWars.com. So it's they have a new series on StarWars.com called Community Stories. So they came to the shop and filmed me and in the shop and as a Native nerd, as an Indigenerd.
Yeah, that's so cool. You touched on it a little bit previously about Indigenous Comic Con, and you're an organizer of this event. How has that whole experience been?
It's been amazing, quite frankly. I had no idea in 2016 what I was getting into. I had organized other events, but founding the Comic Con was really quite a Herculean effort. Because it's not really just a show, it's 3 shows simultaneously. It's a trade show, it's a festival, and it's a workshop area, right? And they're all running all at the same time. So anybody that knows me and anybody that's ever worked with me on this, and I've got a really great staff and a really great crew of volunteers, is the first year I pretty much just muscled the thing on my shoulders. I had no idea what I was doing. We were running in the last week trying to scramble for volunteers. I had just people that were really good-hearted that just came in and was just like, shh, we'll take care of that. Lay down. So that was just really beautiful. So I've learned a lot more about how to put all the things together. I've learned a lot more over time, and we continued to build it out. Up until this last year, we had a whole different. We had moved from Indigenous Comic Con to a big downtown city fest called Indigipop X, which we were going to be showcasing food, Indigenous futurisms, as well as the Comic Con. That was going to go on it was a festival, a 5-day festival. And, unfortunately that was in March. So that was like the week. Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks before we were supposed to go up. They flagged everything. So we were like, well, we'll have to wait. So instead we went digital. We did our Futurisms days. We did a weekend of just like 8 hours of programming that I got friends to record real quick. And then I pulled stuff from old videos from previous years. And I was like, hey, since you can't be here, we're just going to be running this. So I just put it kind of on autoplay. And I check in every now and then, but I just put it on autoplay and just let people check in as they wanted to throughout their day, right? Like they would kind of be at a Comic-Con. So, and that was, I think that was the last weekend of March that I did that, because I moved quick right after we closed out. But yeah, it's been an amazing experience. It's been life altering for me. I got interviewed by places like I got interviewed things like Newsweek, Al Jazeera came out, did an interview. Whatever the NewsHour on PBS came and did a whole thing on us. Star Wars, they found me from Star Wars, so I got to go interview with Star Wars for that. So, it's just really cool stuff that's happened.
How does your book and comic book store help support Native goods and merchandise, or help the Native community?
It brings awareness. It brings awareness that people can find this, and starts to break down the monopoly that certain gigantic companies out of California, Amazon, that they hold, right? What I see is a lot of Native folks. I mean, they're so excited to have a book published by a major publisher and all the rest of that, and they're like, buy my book from Amazon, and I'm like, buy your book from a Native distributor, because we actually get more money back, and then our profits go back into making more creations, right? So creating more things, hiring more people, etc. So I mean, on the economic line, it's job creation, it's economic development, it's our storefront. But for me, it's awareness, right? A shop like this, there's only 3 shops like this in the United States. I think they've got about 8 in so-called Canada, so in First Nations territory in Canada. They've got like 8 or 9. They're well ahead of us. Like, Indigenous communities, that, because a lot of the times they are right up against the cities. So, or they're carved out as part of a suburb in terms of their territory. So they often open up in those spaces. There's only 3, which is us, west of the Mississippi, Birch Bark Books in Minneapolis, and La Resistencia Books in Austin, Texas. And Resistencia is, we'll say, Indigena, so it's more like the transporter than it is, Native North American. We're much more Native North American, but very Western, and Birch Bark is very Northern Eastern. So and I always call them out, because the point is that I was like, yes, I'd love to be the main person forever and ever, because that helps my bottom line. Cool. But I also have been doing this work long enough that I was like, man, if you get one started in California, get one started in Washington State, get one started in New York City, get one started in Alabama, I'm like, that's great. That's what we're trying to do. And that actually makes it more, if you have more of these options and opportunities, then that changes the publishing dynamic, because then more content gets to come out of these places, right? So for me, that's the necessity of having a Red Planet or a Birch Bark or a Resistencia is that it creates a center where these major institutions in Western business and Western economics begin to recognize that if they don't have these small little places or bigger little places, then they're not going to sell this stuff, which in some ways they don't care about. But also it gives us the counterpoint, which is, well, you guys keep saying you care about it, keep saying you care about diversity. Well, if it's not coming out of my shop, and you guys are losing a lot more out of Amazon than you are out of me.
So before we end, we have some rapid fire questions to ask you. The first question.
Okay, here we go.
Ready? Okay, so the first question is, what is your favorite color?
read.
What is something that you have been proud to say that you have accomplished?
Red Planet Books and Comics. I mean, really, that's been the biggest one. And my son, you know, I've kept him alive for what, 10 years now. That's one of my. I don't celebrate his birthday. I celebrate my keeping him alive day. That's what we celebrate in the house.
What is your favorite all-time comic book?
Ooh, oh, that's tough. It always ranges. Comic series all time for nostalgia purposes was the Age of Apocalypse. That whole series was like right at the time when I was, you know, dead on reading comics. That was my high school age, and it was phenomenal. And it's aged pretty well. I've gone back and read it a couple of times. I think the one that I just like I put down and was like, this is the most amazing thing I've read. I mean, to be honest, I'd probably say in the mainstream, I'd say something like Saga. You know, in the alternative work, I only served as the publisher for Deer Woman. So the Deer Woman anthology, I would say, was incredibly moving for me as well. So in terms of like Native comics and whatnot, I think that one, representation of Native women, is really important to me. And the work that Dr. LaPonce and my partner, my artistic partner, Wishoya Alvitre, put together was phenomenal.
What is some advice that you wish that you would have known when you were younger?
Not to really let the ego go, to not take to not take as much personally. I still take everything personally, always. It's one of the reasons why I've kind of started to really focus a lot more. I actually appreciate that Facebook has just like Facebook business, so I don't actually have to go on Facebook anymore, because a lot of times when you interact, like it's the Wild West, and I take it. I mean, anybody says, they're like, oh, your hair is out of place, and I was just like, so, you know, I wish I had, you know, developed a skill and capacity that a lot of my friends have, to sort of let things roll a little easier.
Can you describe yourself as a teenager in 3 words?
As a teenager, in 3 words, dramatic. What do I want to say? Hold on, I'm trying to think of the right word. I guess it's gonna be 4 words, but we won't count the of. Dramatic center of attention.
Okay.
If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you have?
Right now, as a Pueblo person, and I get this question, and I've thought about it a lot. I think right now it would really be, it's split between 2. One is to be able to, like a heart persuasion. So in talking with people, you would be able to like connect deeper. Not because I mean, like the mind stuff and like telekinesis and, you know, all that other stuff. Like, I feel like that's really sort of invasive, but it would be better to be able to like connect to people's hearts, right? Because like I just think we need that so much. Because like, you know, there's people that you're just like, oh, I like you. Oh, you're kind of horrible, but I don't think you're like totally horrible. You're just like a little horrible, and maybe if we had a better connection,
Yeah.
you would be able to change, because you could feel, so, you know, you'd be able to like feel mine, I'd be able to feel yours, and we could change like that. The other thing that I was sort of like default to is water, like water making. You know, from here as a Pueblo with no water in a desert, it's sacred, it's important. So, you know, if I had that power, it would be to just like, you know, be like, all right, you guys don't need to worry about all this stuff anymore. In fact, you know, I'd be like the abyss. I'd just have everything cascade. I don't know. Like that.
If you could have 3 people, dead or alive, for dinner guests, who would it be?
That's a great question. My dad would always be one. He passed away in 2003, so he's always at the top of my list. Man, who am I thinking of? These are good questions, y'all. This is great. You put me. These are I wasn't even rapid fire. These are like really deeply thoughtful questions. I mean, I'd probably go with more modern folks. I'd take somebody like, you know, like Maria Tallchief would be amazing to have at dinner and kind of hear her story. And let's think, from way back to kind of mix it up a little bit. Who would we want? Probably like, Brant, Chief Brant, from the Iroquois Confederacy. He was instrumental in the Revolutionary War. I'd love to. I mean, that'd be awesome. So I'll throw you a little history. So way back.
What does success for you mean right now?
For me, it really means sustainability, being able to continue doing the work that I'm doing for as long as I possibly can, and to be comfortable and to bring all of my friends and all of my colleagues in so that we all get to enjoy, eat well, live well, and really just love what we're doing.
What game are you currently playing right now?
Right now, I just picked up, actually, I can tell you, I tend to not get too deep into stuff. I actually just restarted playing Overwatch with my kid. So we've gone back to Overwatch. Civ 6 is always on deck for me. That's just, but I played it since it first came out, like the original Civilization. So like, that's just kind of on my computer. But I started playing Apple Arcade's Grindstone. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like Candy Crush, but I don't have to pay for all the upgrades, and I don't have to see the ads on Apple Arcade. So it's just like, it's like a little dungeon conquering thing. There are times when I really just like games. They're just like those kinds of mindless games because it's meditative.
Right.
I don't have to think about anything, and it passes away like 30 minutes, 45 minutes before bed, and then I'm just like calm, and I'm like thinking about like dungeon slashing. It's perfect.
So what is a book that you have read recently or are currently reading that you would recommend?
Absolutely. I would recommend, what have I got? Did I bring it with me? Yes, I did. So I just picked up, I've actually got a couple. I know you said one. Darcy Little Badger's Strange Lands. I just brought this with me. It's not recent, but it's one that I'm picking up, which I'm really excited about. Also, Darcy Little Badger's Lots Away, which just came out. What is it? I'll go with Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indian. I don't think that's quite the title, but yeah, I think it's The Only Good Indian. And it's his new release. It's a horror book. I could list off so many, but those are the ones that I've got right now that I would highly recommend.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee Francis IV. We learned a lot about you. Thank you for taking the time every day to talk with us. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they can connect with you?
Sure, absolutely. You can find me at Red Planet's Books N Comics. It's not Books and, it's booksncomics.com. You can see all the things that we have in the shop. It's all online. Native Realities is getting a facelift, so it'll be back up to kind of show the projects that we're the upcoming projects, specifically the card game that we've got coming on. We're going to be working on with Dr. LaPonce on a super secret project that we can't talk about right now, but be on the lookout for it. It should be a lot of fun, and there's a couple of fun role-playing games that we're trying to get out as well. So that's the upcoming stuff. You can find me at Twitter at Lee Francis IV, Lee Francis 4. Facebook, just literally type in Lee Francis 4th. You'll find me everywhere. And Indigenous Comic Con, Red Planet Books and Comics, Native Realities, Wordcraft Circle, and all things in between.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your
Thank you
time.
so
We
much.
really enjoyed it.
Oh,
Thank
my
you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you all. This was great. This was a great interview. Y'all, this was
yay.
like
Thank you.
one of
Thank
my more fun
you.
interviews that I've had. I don't get to, I mean, I do the road stuff, but I don't get to like kind of nerd as much as I did on this one. This was great. I like the rapid fire. Those are good questions.
Yay,
Thank you.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Glendale Library Arts and Culture channel.
Tune in every Friday at 4:30 for Teen Gen Talks. And if you would like to contact us and be part of the Teen Gen Talks, please email us at teengentalks@glendaleca.gov. Thank you. See you next episode.
Bye.
Bye.